Anne Jellicoe was born on March 26, 1823, in the factory town of Mountmellick in County Laois.
Anne Jellicoe was a very private person. She had a keen sense of humour, loved music and literature. She had a wonderful power of drawing out what was best in every girl by believing in them and loving them. Her energy was splendid, her character nobly large, with a delicacy of inner refinement. On important occasions she wore a brilliant red shawl which mostly trailed on the ground after her.
I was brought up as a Quaker. It's a Christian denomination, it's rooted in Christianity, but it came about in the 17th century. It was founded by George Fox. He was living in the north of England at the time, and he felt a frustration with the established church and with the Puritan churches that were prevalent at the time, and he would have talked to the clergy, and he was searching the truth.
She married John Jellicoe and moved to Clara in County Offaly, where Anne set up a lace and embroidery factory to provide employment for women. In 1861, she was co-founder with Ada Barbara Corlett of the Irish Society for Promoting the Training and Employment of Educated Women, later known as the Queen's Institute, which provided training courses for women and assisted their employment.
But it's an interesting period because of as you said, the start of working woman. We don't think it starts that far back as well. Kind of think, even in Ireland, we kind of think, oh, maybe the 70s. Do you know what I mean? We don't think it's that far away or that long ago that there's kind of all these founding mothers of all these different groups and societies and schools. And or early 20th century. So you're looking at the kind of move from that Edwardian, really S-shaped, blouson, frilly, massive hats, and then just from about 1906, things changing where it's become quite streamlined. Women having ankle-length skirts means that you can cycle more, but women were then in cars and things as well like that, so having this giant hat full of feathers wasn't the most practical thing if you wanted to get around, and women have always wanted to be out and about and be able to see the world and to try and engage in it. But as I said, a lower middle class woman could potentially have a blouse, be quite clever and just wash this part and look very, you could change up your pieces, your neck pieces, like, Queen or Princess of Wales, Alexandra had all those details, but you could potentially create your cuff and collars and change it up on dresses so that you look like you've got a few different outfits. So the fashion lent itself to that. You could make yourself very presentable.
In 1866, she founded Alexandra College in Dublin for the sound and liberal education of gentlewomen, as the Irish Times reported. Alexandra College was the first university-style institution for women in Ireland. It flourished under her leadership and guidance, with much support from the staff of Trinity College Dublin.
Emily plays solitaire, the piano keys just stare back at me, at this fumbling.
September 1923 was the beginning of a whole new way of life for me. It was a bright sunny morning when I went to Alexandra School for the first time. As usual, I was alone, having been shown the way by my parents some weeks earlier. I was 2 weeks late for the beginning of term because I'd contracted a bad attack of measles near the end of school holidays and had missed the customary entrance examination and interview with the headmistress. I should have been nervous, but I do remember my satisfaction that at last I was going to school looking like other schoolgirls. My navy gym dress had been shortened. I had a navy blazer, a white Panama hat, and a new white blouse. A red plaid bow bounced at the end of each of my two long, thick plaits, and I had a new leather case with my initials stamped on it. Young ladies did not use satchels in those days.
And then you mentioned she married the Bewley family. Are they the Bewleys? Yeah?
Yeah. So she became Winifred Bewley. And yeah, Victor Bewley was, he became managing director of Bewley's Cafes when he was 21, because his father died when he was 20. And again, Victor actually was very interested in the business growing up. It was his grandfather, Ernest, who founded the cafes. Sorry, his grandfather, Joshua, who started the whole business in the 1840s. And then his father, Ernest, continued. And it was his father, Ernest, who set up Grafton Street Bewley's. And subsequently Westmoreland Street and George's Street.
Towards the end of the 19th century, when things were starting to open up, so women are starting to, middle class women are able to engage in sport a little bit more, like cycling, and then the whole fashion of cycling and clothes that developed around that, and women being interested in tennis. It's all around this middle class kind of developing and leisure activities and all the things that would go with it.
Hockey was the other joy of my life at that time. I was not built for running and soon gravitated to the position of goalkeeper, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Slacks or shorts were not allowed on the hockey field for females of any age. And more than once, there were complaints from convents where we had played matches because the nuns considered that our tunics were indecently short. On our part, we grumbled when playing against teams who wore long, floppy gym dresses, because their goalkeeper usually tucked her voluminous skirts behind her pads in such a way that the surplus material could be useful in adding width to her figure and thus be useful in diverting a ball which would otherwise have slipped into the goal. Occasionally, even our umpire supported our complaint. My tunic was only about 4 inches longer than my blazer. Once mother found a shop which sold really long black stockings. So perhaps the nuns' criticisms had some foundation, although I was not the only one who preferred brevity. On windy days, a match could be held up for several precious minutes while the ball was disentangled from the folds of a decent skirt, and the luckless player penalized for carrying the ball.
One of the young foundresses of Irish women's hockey at Alexandra College, Hilda Webb, was 20 years later, in 1912, one of 8 women arrested for throwing stones at government buildings in Dublin during protests by the militant Irish Women's Franchise League, an organisation for women's suffrage. 6 years later, the right to vote was granted to women.
Friend, we've been at war again, drawn blood again, it's tiring.
I asked Lucy McDermott, how relevant is it to have an education in order to become a revolutionary?
Actually, I don't think it was relevant for most of the women, but there are 2 things that I think were relevant. First of all, a lot of the women whose accounts I read had Fenian backgrounds. Somebody in their family was active in the mid-19th century in revolutionary groups, and the militant nationalism carried on over several generations. And, you know, the family would, They would have nationalist newspapers around. They would be singing nationalist songs, and they would be active in whatever was happening of a nationalist nature. And so really it was a family tradition and part of the sort of cultural legacy of families for many of the women and men out in the Rising. And in the years before the Rising, and especially the years, in all the years up to December 1918, when Irish women finally got the vote, the issue of nationalism versus feminism was debated everywhere. It was in the newspapers, it was in meetings, private conversations, private correspondence. And the issue was, are these two causes compatible? Can you work for both of them? Or are they incompatible? Is one subordinate to the other? And if so, which one? So that was debated a lot. And I think really most of the women out in the Rising would consider themselves feminists, but they wouldn't all have used that word of themselves. I think the ones in the Irish Citizen Army would have, but the other ones, I don't know, because there's no statistic on that. But clearly this was a time when the civic position of women was in the process of changing, as it still is today.
Think of Countess Markovich, she's saying to all her women, before 1916, wear your short skirts and put your gold, put your jewelry in the bank. And it's like, these women might not have jewelry. Might not be the most important thing for them. Like maybe the short skirts they might be able to sort out, but it's that level of insight into, okay, they see the unfairness, but they haven't lived and breathed it necessarily, and they're still kind of snobbery in their upbringing. But I guess that's just part of being human, right? We've made them into sort of icons, but they were very human, and they had all their flaws and failings as well.
They did everything. They could all read and write, and they all left wonderful records with the Bureau of Military History, with the Military Pensions Board, and letters. They were wonderful. I loved them. And some of my favorites were not very educated in a formal way, though they were very sharp. Catherine Byrne, for instance, was a shop assistant at a grocer's. Annie Cooney was a seamstress. Pauline Morgan worked in Brown Thomas, which let her go from her job because she had participated in the Rising. And they're some of my favorites, but they're also, I have other favorites. There were university graduates like Min Ryan and Louise Gavin Duffy, Margaret Skinner, who went to a teacher's training college in Glasgow and was a math teacher. There were nurses like Aoife de Burka, Phyllis Morgan, Elizabeth O'Farrell. There were doctors, Bridget Lyons, Kathleen Lynn. Mary McLaughlin was only 15 years old. She was one of the youngest people active in the Rising, but she'd been a member of Clan na Gael Scouts. So that was one of those organizations for children, but that made her active. Maeve Kavanagh was a poet. Helena Maloney was an actress. Constance Markievicz, one of the most famous, was an artist, as well as a socialist and feminist. And Ginny Shanahan, who was in the Irish Citizen Army, is listed in the 1911 census as a cook and a domestic servant. So really, whatever was available for women to do in that period at all different levels, these women were doing.
I corresponded with a woman called Joan Gallagher, who attended Alexandra College in the 1950s. And later I talked to her on the phone, and then I had a chat with her daughter, Darina Gallagher.
Simple kind of exposure to all of that through her kind of work at home, like traveller women coming, and she'd be teaching them how to read and write in the kitchen, and be a bit annoying there was someone there and you weren't getting your dinner or whatever, but yeah, so I guess that was interesting to think about Anne Jellicoe, rather than just Alexandra College, but that kind of look at problems in society and, try and do something about it. And I think my mother definitely had that has that in her, extremely passionate about kind of fixing problems in a small way, you know,
Well,
little by little.
your mother mentioned that in Alexandra College, there was a principal who used to encourage them, if they wanted to on break time, sit with her. Miss White was her name, very gifted vice principal. And at lunchtime, if they wished, they could discuss the newspapers, the headings, and political events.
Wow, amazing.
So I think that's part of what lives on from Anne Jellicoe, is that kind of ethos of well-rounded individuals who know about everything and take interest in what's happening in the world.
Designer, but music, she like, so there'd be, my bedroom would be full of a choir of varying ability. But everybody would be allowed into the choir, and she'd be doing Ain't Misbehaving or something all by myself, and getting this whole group, my bedroom full of lovely women singing, and my dad, going home from teaching all day and dreading this going on.
Until the late 90s, there was on Leinster Road West a nursing home called the Alexandra Guild, which was for ex-pupils of Alexandra College. Joan Gallagher told me that in the 50s, when she was a schoolgirl, she and another girl dressed up as little old ladies and turned up at the Alexandra Guild to play a joke on the matron. In 1997, when I moved from Spain to Dublin, I volunteered at the Alexandra Guild. I was a reader for a lady who had lost her eyesight, and she asked me to read to her a biography of David Norris, who I knew nothing about at the time.
His back is sore, his voice won't do what he wants it to. It's been a long day too. Friend, we've been at war again, drawn blood again. It's tiring. But the whispers from upstairs let you know there's someone there. Emily plays solitaire, the piano keys just stare back at me. At this fumbling grizzly bear. He tries to make it right again. His hand, it's in vain again. His open palm becomes a palm, a jagged claw that cuts you so. But the whispers from upstairs let you know there's someone there. Emily plays solitaire, the piano keys just stare.